Well, hello students, and welcome to Lesson 2 of CO 241, Web Databases. We're going to be looking at Chapter 2 of your textbook in this lesson, and the title of this chapter is How to Code a PHP Application. And what we're going to do is take sort of a bird's eye view of PHP. We're not going to drill down into too much depth. We're just going to get you familiar with the language. And in Lesson 3, we're going to do the same thing with the database side and talk about relational databases and introduce you to MySQL. In this lesson, we're going to do stuff like this. We're going to talk about how you build a simple web page and host it in a browser. And by web page, I mean a PHP document. We'll learn about variables, how to create them, how to manipulate them, how to present them in a way that's presentable to the user. So for instance, if you've got a decimal number and you want to show it the way we show money, where you have the dollar sign rounded to the hundredths place, how do you do that? We'll talk about how to get data from the user properly, how to make sure it's valid. We'll get into decision making and loops and some various PHP functions that are helpful. Again, we're not going to go through everything in the chapter. There's quite a bit in it. We're just going to give you enough that you need to understand the most important things, the basics, and get that assignment cranked out for this lesson as well. So those are our goals. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive down here into the computer screen and we'll get started. Now, the first thing I want you to notice here is that for this particular lesson, I'm going to present this on a Mac. Last time I used a Windows machine, this time I'm going to use a Mac. So I'm still running XAMPP, but I'm using XAMPP in OS X as opposed to Windows. And there are different versions of XAMPP. Obviously, there's also one for Linux operating system. But in this case, it works exactly the same way as it does in Windows, in that it puts a folder on your computer, and inside of that folder is another folder called htdocs. And inside of that folder is where you put your web pages. And so what I did was I put a 241 folder inside of there, and then you go into that, you get your book applications, the exercise starts and solutions, and then right here, lesson examples is where I'm going to be showing you stuff out of these videos for the most part. So we'll put our examples in there that we'll build. So all I did was I installed XAMPP, and it created this folder, this XAMPP folder, and on an Apple, it puts it in this applications folder that you go to. It's kind of like the Windows start menu where you go to the applications there. So XAMPP, like in Windows, in OS X, you'll open it up and it pops up with a screen or a window that looks like this. It's a little bit different looking in Windows, but it works the same way. You have a tab here that says Manage Servers, and these are the three components of XAMPP, and we're not really using the first two, the MySQL and the FTP services, but I started them up anyway just to show you this. The Apache Web Server, you'll always use that. The Apache Web Server is what's responsible for PHP, and everything we do needs PHP, so we'll always run that. MySQL, obviously, we'll be using that here soon. And then this service here opens up what's called an FTP server, and that enables you to transfer files via the FTP protocol out to the server. Well, we are the server. We can just copy the files right into the folders. We don't have to FTP stuff out over a network. So we're not really going to use that particular server. I don't really need to run that. I'll usually be just running Apache or MySQL. And since I don't need either of these, I'm going to shut these off. So I'm just going to stop these two. And I'll leave the Apache web server running. Now, they'll turn red when they're off, and obviously green means you're good. So the very first thing you want to do when you install XAMPP, whether it be in Windows or on a Mac, is make sure that you can start these servers on your machine, specifically Apache and MySQL. So I'm just going to assume that you've done that and that you're good to go with that. Now, the other thing that I'm going to show you that's different is this tool, IntelliJ, which is what you're looking at here. And let me just go ahead and close this project so I can just show this to you here. This IDE is similar to NetBeans. Actually, there are three main products that are used to create Java applications. You have IntelliJ IDEA, NetBeans, and Eclipse. And it turns out, since Java has roots in the open source community, and so does PHP, and so does JavaScript, that all three of those tools are capable of allowing you to edit and run PHP and MySQL applications. If you want to do that, what you do is you go out to the website and you get IntelliJ. And by the way, you as a student, you can download the entire suite of products, including IDEA, and you can do it for free. You get it licensed for a year, and I believe you can renew that every year, but you just have to prove that you're a student, which really just comes down to sending them an email with the .edu address on the end of it. So you install this thing, and it's primarily designed for Java. So what you have to do when you get it and you install it, so you go to the IntelliJ Preferences window, and what you do next is you click Plugins. Now what you want to do here is you want to add a plugin for PHP, and it's not going to be in this list. So what you want to do is you want to click Browse Repositories. You'll want to be connected to the internet here when you do this, and what you'll do is you'll come in here, you'll type in PHP, and you'll scroll down, and you'll notice that you have a bunch of stuff here, and you click PHP, and you don't see install here because I've already installed it, but there'll be a blue, I believe it's a blue button here that says install plugin or something like that. Oh, I'm sorry, it's green. It looks like this. It'll be look just like this, and it'll probably be right there, but it'll say install plugin. So you just click it and jump through the hoops, and it will install that plugin. And as you can see here, it enables editing and debugging of PHP. Now, there are some other things that you can take. I took this advanced autocomplete, and I took the annotations. I didn't take the 1-up, but I guess you could if you wanted. And I didn't do anything with the rest of this stuff, but the main thing is you need the first one there, the PHP. Now you're going to have to restart IntelliJ when you do this to get the plugins working, but as you scroll down through your plugin list, you'll notice that PHP, where did it go? It's now there and running. You should already have this, but you'll want to also make sure that your HTML tools is in there, and it should be. There's no that's basically like a default setting, and that's really all you have to do there. So once you have done that, you'll be able to create projects that are PHP projects. So for instance here, if I say create new project, and I choose PHP, empty project, and I'll hit next. Now, the first time you do this, your PHP language level will probably be 5.5. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe 5.4. I'm not exactly sure, but interpreter here, it'll say no interpreter, as you see it's doing now. You want to make sure you're running your XAMPP utility. You want to make sure your Apache web server is running before you go and select the interpreter. Now, if you don't see anything on this list, that's fine. If you do see something on the list, it may be because OS X has PHP installed by default, but we don't want to use the default PHP that is in OS X. Instead, what we want to do is click the ellipsis here, and you want to click the plus. Now I already did this, so it's already all here, but you click plus, and this is the default PHP that comes in OS X. And what you're going to want to do is select Other Local, and then you'll have to select a PHP executable. Now, what you do is you go to your XAMPP folder, and it's going to be different on OS X versus Windows. But I'm just going to go and, because I know where it's at here, down to XAMPP, and you'll want to go into the bin folder. And as you look here, you'll notice when you scroll down, PHP is listed in there. It's the PHP interpreter. So you will select that, and it will automatically detect the version. And the debugger we'll talk more about later. I'm not going to worry about that right now. You don't have to do any configuration options. Basically, you click OK at this point. I'm going to go ahead and back out of this, and I've already done all this. I'm just going to click PHP, and I'll select OK. And you'll notice here the version pops up. Now, the language level, it puts it on 5.4, and that is fine for what we're doing. If you want to use later versions, you certainly can. It probably won't matter for what we're doing, at least initially. So we'll just leave it as at the setting it's already at. Shouldn't have to mess with the include path. The project location, the default is to create a folder called Idea Projects. And what I did is I made a folder inside of that called CO241. And in this case, we're going to say Lesson 2, Example 1. So the project is named L2 Example 1, and the folder will go inside of CO241. So just like NetBeans, it's going to build you a folder structure, and it's going to put your files inside of that folder structure. So when I hit Finish, it says the directory doesn't exist, and I'll say OK to build it, and the project will now exist. Now, if I go out to the Idea Projects folder, and I look, let's say I've got a bunch of stuff in here, but if I look at CO241, here is my L2 Example 1. And I'm going to just go ahead and blow away this other stuff as long as I'm here. So now, notice there's a file in here called a .iml file. Just like NetBeans, it puts other stuff in this folder. But when you look inside of the environment, and you drop the project down, you'll notice that file sitting there. And under this idea, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. But basically, if you go up to your project and right-click and you select a new PHP file, and I call it index, notice the file extension is PHP, so I don't have to say index.php. If I just say index, it will add the extension on for me. So I'll click OK, and it adds it into the project. Now, if I go back to my folder, you'll notice the file is now there. And you'll notice here in IntelliJ, it puts the opening delimiter up there and a comment. It doesn't put the closing one in, and I don't know why that is, but I'll put that in there. So I'm just going to just for now, I'm just going to echo out a little statement like that. Now, this is what's cool about this particular IDE. When you're in your source code, if you come up to this upper right corner and you want to run your file, you'll notice you have all these browser choices: Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Opera. In Windows, I'm not exactly sure what you'll get here, but the point is you can test using your browser of choice, which is kind of cool. Now, if I choose Firefox, the page comes up and runs. Now, when you run this program, take a look at the address up here in the address bar. Notice that it says localhost, but it says localhost :63342. So it's using a different port number than the default XAMPP port. What that means in English is that your project that's running right now isn't going to be where you'd expect it to be, which would be under the XAMPP folder. So if I go to my Applications, XAMPP, htdocs, it's not in here. Is going to the actual folder where your project is and getting the system mapped so that that folder is considered to exist on the web server so that it can host it. So that's how IntelliJ works. And if I close this browser window, I can go then back over to PHP here, and I could, or IntelliJ here, and I could run it again if I wanted to test it further. So there's more to it than that, but we haven't talked about debugging yet. There's a whole bunch of debugging capabilities in here as well. But I think I'll leave the environment at that just for right now, and then let you play around with it a bit. Again, it's similar to NetBeans, and yet it's different. They're all a little bit different, these IDEs. That said, they're very helpful, and if I wanted to take this project and put it on a real web server, I would go into my IDEA projects and land right into my project here, and I would take the files I need out of here. I wouldn't take the IML file, but I'd take everything else and FTP it up to the web server and host it. So hosting it on a production server is not that big a deal, and running it is actually quite convenient and simple as well if you do it with an IntelliJ. And that's also true of NetBeans, and it's also true of Eclipse. So I think I'll close this first part of the video off and make another part here where we actually dive into the example I want to show you, because it took a little bit longer for me to explain IntelliJ here than I thought it would, and I don't want to make these videos too long. So I'll go ahead and wrap this first part up, and I'll make a second part and publish that separately. So we'll see you in the next part.